here of Horizon Community Church. We're going to have some folks helping us, some ASL folks. We have some hearing impaired people with us this morning, so they'll be helping on my left-hand side. I welcome you for this special commemoration of the life of Bob Winter. Bob and Carolyn were part of our church ever since they moved here 19 years ago. It was a few years before I got a bit of Bob's backstory, and ever since then, Bob has fascinated me. I'm not sure Bob trusted institutional religion much, but he was very faithful to this church, and I did sense a genuine love for God, for his family, for people in general, and for the poor. About 3 times a year, I'd get a good sermon from Bob. The rest of the time, he would aim his razor-sharp wit at some part of my sermon. I loved him very much. You can see in your programs, we have lots of ways to honor and remember Bob. I'll help orchestrate, but the family will be leading the service. I'm going to ask you to stand with me as I pray, and then we're going to sing an old hymn, Be Still My Soul, together, and we'll remain standing for that song. Would you stand with me? This prayer comes from the Book of Common Prayer. O God of grace and glory, we remember before you our brother Bob. We thank you for giving him to us, his family and friends, to know and to love as a companion on our earthly pilgrimage. In your boundless compassion, console us who mourn. Give us faith to see in death the gate of eternal life, so that in quiet confidence we may continue our course on earth, until by your call we are reunited with those who have gone before through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. We'll sing now our song.
Be still, my soul, the Lord is on your side. Bear patiently the cross of grief and pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change, he faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways, leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, thy God doth undertake to guide the future as he has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, thy waves and winds still know his voice who ruled them while he dwelt below. Be still, my soul, the hour is hastening on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, borrow for God soul. When change and tears all pass, all safe and blessed, we shall meet at last.
Seated. I'm going to invite Kaylin and Torin to come up. They're going to be reading several poems.
This poem is called Remember Me. Don't remember me with sadness, don't remember me with tears. Remember all the laughter we've shared throughout the years. Now I am contented that my life, it was worthwhile, knowing that I passed along the way I made somebody smile. When you are walking down the street and you've got me on your mind, I'm walking in your footsteps, only half a step behind. So please don't be unhappy just because I'm out of sight. Remember that I'm with you each morning, noon, and night.
Your life was a blessing, your memory a treasure. You are loved beyond words and missed beyond measure.
I'm going to now invite Dave Winter up to share some stories with us. This is Bob's brother.
Wow. Thanks for coming. I'm impressed, very impressed. So I'm speaking because I've known Bob longer than anybody else, more than 80 years. In fact, the first time we met, this is a celebration of Bob's life. The first time we met, I said, "Goo goo gaga." He said, "That little kid can't even speak." Bob was 3 years older than I am. He was had his own friends, etc., growing up, but he was a role model for me, a moral compass. Of the older three of the six boys, he was the favorite of my mother. The reason he was is he could do just about anything. He was helpful to her at all times, unlike me, for example. Before I forget, I want to be sure to thank Carolyn. You've been a great caregiver to Bob during the last 2 to 3 years, and it was very much appreciated. Thank you very much, Carolyn. And you had great help from Greg and Elise, and even Jeff and Lindsay from their Seattle homes. So thank you very much to all of you. We enjoyed a lot of trips with Bob and Carolyn. We went to Canada, Emerald Lake, Morro Bay, Yosemite, lots of different places. It was a great joy to be with them. And we're going to miss that, Bob, very much from that. Bob and I bonded pretty much when he was 12. I'm sorry, when I was 12 and he was 15. That Christmas in 1952, I woke up one morning right after Christmas and I couldn't swallow very much, and they took me to the hospital and they did a test on me and I had polio. So they took me to Iowa City, about 120 miles away. And I was there about a week, and I looked up. Coming in the door was Bob, and he got polio as well. So we shared the same room for a couple of weeks, where twice a day they would come in, and they thought the best thing to do with two people with polio would be to make them bend their stiff bodies for a few minutes. For me, I cried every time, twice a day, but Bob took it like unbelievable. I looked over at him, and he was being twisted in all kinds of shapes. Not a teardrop. Guy was tough. Then we went to the what they call the Polio Ward in the hospital, where there were maybe 10 or 12 people with polio, but none of us were in danger of passing away at that time. No iron lung or anything. One of the interesting things that happened there was, there's too many people speaking here, so I guess I'm not going to go into all the stories, but I'll finish that part of this presentation with, so I got there a week before Bob. I was well enough to go home, but New Hampton is 120 miles from Iowa City, and in those days, parents don't come pick you up when they're going to pick up another son in another week or so, so I had to stay there an extra week. And I wasn't thrilled with that, and one of the things I did, Bob had a wheelchair, and I borrowed the wheelchair and rolled around the hospital for a while. And I'll get back to that story in a minute. I have some stories about Bob. He's well known, I think, for being a calm, quiet, not very effusive person who always did the right thing. There were a couple stories I'll share with you briefly. I'll start with the easiest one. We had a ping pong table in our garage. Bob was very competitive. At the time, I was a little bit better than he was. And I would beat him in ping pong, and then I had to duck under the table because he would throw his ping pong at me. So I survived that. But the other story about him, which probably none of you have heard before, is that being as competitive as he was, we lived on a farm. The hay mow, which ordinarily would be for hay, we made into a basketball court. So from time to time, we played basketball, and we invited people from town and other places to play basketball with us. I did not participate in this event myself, but I understand that it was a very difficult game. It was tough, and Bob ended up on the losing side. He was not happy with that. As you know, a hay mow has two floors, the ground floor where you milk the cows and the top floor where the hay is. There was a door outside the top floor that Bob got a pitchfork and chased the opponents out that top door. They had to jump out to the ground. They all survived, of course, but that is something that showed his competitive nature. We were at Loras College together for 2 years when he was studying to enter the priesthood. And we played a lot of basketball, baseball, bridge, even played ping pong. They had tournaments in those days, and I helped Bob win each semester for 2 years. We won the championship in the doubles ping pong, so way to go, Bob. I'm not sure. Jenny, our daughter, is going to speak in a little bit, and she's going to mention, I believe, a game of hearts. Bob and I love to play hearts, and Brenda too, and we would often be quite competitive in heart games. And one time Jenny's going to tell this story, about, you can believe it or not, but one time, we all played, and Jenny says she won. And I just want you to know that unless she has written proof with signatures of those of us that participated in the game, unless she can show you evidence of that, I wouldn't believe her story. But she thinks she won, and I doubt if she has evidence to prove it. So Brenda and I visited Bob a week before he passed away. And Bob and I had some conversations, as Brenda did too. And he was pretty still all there. And he reminded me of a couple things. One of them was, almost the first thing he said to me when I got there was, you stole my wheelchair. And when we were back in Iowa City, that when he was 15 years old, he remembered that. But he also, somehow we were talking about the oldest brother, Dick, probably in heaven. I hope he's there. I'm pulling for him. Anyway, so I talked to Bob. He'd be meeting Dick there in heaven. And out of the blue, Bob said to me, "You're not going to heaven." And I said, "What do you mean I'm not going to heaven? Why do you say that?" He said, "You committed too many mortal sins." Now, I'm assuming that he was joking, so we'll just move on from there. Okay, I'm about finished. I want to ask all of you to do a favor for me. I was at a funeral a few years ago of a lady I barely knew because we were friends with her daughter. At any rate, at one point, and I'm going to do this with you, at one point the daughter said, "Okay, we want to remember her mother more than just for today. So would everybody here, I'm going to ask you to do this too. Think of something you do in your life on a daily basis or a weekly basis, and think and hook Bob to that activity, so that when that happens, for example, this woman that I barely knew, I thought to myself, well, let's see, if the wind blows the curtain through the window, I'm going to think of her. And it lasted for quite a while. I was thinking about her. So I want you to do the same. With Bob, what I'm going to do is when I have my first cup of coffee in the morning, I'm going to think of Bob and have good thoughts about him. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think of something you're going to do in the future which will remind you of Bob. Okay, you can start thinking about that now. I'll give you a few seconds to think of something for yourself, and then I'll go on. Okay, I hope you've come up with something. And just to close, we Midwesterners never talked a lot, never said, "I love you." But I'll make an exception today. Bob, I love you. I'll miss you. And will you please rest in peace? Thank you.
I think I'll think of Bob when I preach. How about that? Does that work? I'm going to invite Giles and Bowen to come up. Giles is going to read a scripture for us, and then Bowen's going to read a letter that Bob wrote his grandchildren, I think last Christmas. Is that right?
Okay, I'll be reading Matthew 25, verses 34 through 40. Okay. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me."
And this is a letter Bob wrote last Christmas. Dear grandchildren, this is your first and maybe last Christmas letter from Grandpa Bob. I want you to know how much I care about all of you and how proud I am of each of you. I could not ask for better grandchildren. Do well in school, do what your parents tell you to do, and try to be nice to everyone. You are blessed by having such good parents. There really is a God and life after death. I know because I'm almost there. St. Peter said he'd save me a seat. Have a nice Christmas, Grandpa Bob.
We're going to have a video now from an old friend of Bob's, Howard Miller, who was a priest with Bob, and he wanted to share his thoughts.
Hello to all of you. My name is Howard Miller, a longtime friend of Bob Winter. First, I want to express my condolences to Carolyn, to Greg, and Elise, to Jeff and Lindsay, to all of you, Bob's grandchildren, to Bob's brothers and their wives, and to all his family and friends gathered today. Bob and I met. First of all, I might mention that I'm going to be reading off this paper because I really wanted to say exactly what I wanted to say with the exact words, because Bob was special to me very much. Bob and I met in 1956, and I liked him a lot from first meeting him. Bob was very smart, good-natured, friendly, warm, a very good athlete, full of life, and he had a great sense of humor. We both attended Loras College and the same seminary. We were both ordained Catholic priests, and both of us asked to be assigned to our mission in Cochabamba, Bolivia. It was in Cochabamba during 1967 and 1968 where we really got to know each other very well. We did our work, but we also had many laughs and a lot of fun. But in 1968, there was great tragedy and social upheaval. Vietnam and the killings of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. We both wanted to do what we could to help bring peace and good race relations. That same year, we were both deciding to leave the priesthood. We had no plans of what to do next. We did not have jobs and little money. There we were, both nearly 31 years old, and in major ways, starting our adult lives all over again. Bob shared that his brother Dave and wife Linda were willing for us to live with them until we had jobs and a place to live. Thank you again, Dave and Brenda. And hi, Jenny. I remember you, even though you were very young, you may not remember me, but I do remember you. Best wishes. They also gave us Dave and Brenda gave us great tips on jobs with LA County as social workers, which is exactly the kind of work we wanted to do. Bob and I then lived together in South LA for about 6 months until we got our own places, and we each ended up getting our MSWs and doing social work the rest of our careers. I got to know Bob really well with all the time we had spent together. I learned he had great integrity and a passion for social, economic, and racial justice. He had deep compassion and a strong desire to help others, especially the neediest and most vulnerable. Bob hated the mistreatment of anyone, and he hated prejudicial attitudes or treatment of anyone. Bob was a thoughtful, kind, and giving person. I experienced that firsthand. When my wife and I returned to SoCal after my studies with no job or money, Bob and Carolyn let us stay with them, gave me job tips, and co-signed for us to get a car for work. So kind and generous of both of them. When our house burned down in the Thomas Fire of 2017, Bob had one question for me. Do you need money? As so many of you know, nearly every Christmas, Bob and Carolyn would send out Christmas cards with pictures of their family. I love to see Bob's face. He always looked so happy, content, and proud of his family. About Bob and Carolyn, I always felt that they were made for each other, a perfect match. In concluding, I want to say just a few things. I always had a lot of fun with Bob, and that is worth so much. I have always deeply respected and admired Bob. I have always felt deep affection and love for Bob as my friend, brother. Bob was a great and good man. I love you, Bob. Thank you very much for being my friend. And thank you all for letting me share.
I'm going to invite Jenny up, Jenny Winter, who's the niece of Bob, and she's going to share with some help.
Hi. So usually I should have a prepared paper here, but I couldn't find my paper this morning. My apologies. But my sister here, we cherish him so much, whether paper or not. We still cherish him. Okay. Oh, there's supposed to be a letter up there? But I'll share though. So what he wrote to me. It's okay. It's okay. Both. Don't worry. I have it here. It's okay. So he wrote me a letter when I had graduated from college. That was in 2011. And I was struggling with school. School was so hard for me. It was so challenging. But I didn't give up. And Uncle Bob was so proud of me. He was so proud of me, and he wrote me a letter here. It says here that the whole family is so proud of you. And it says the path is going to be long, but to stay motivated. And you'll be able to stay on task for so long. So you're a wonderful example for my children and for everyone else also. When you were born, your parents had sent us a letter explaining your medical difficulties. I did not, and they did not know that you were deaf. How can you tell if a baby was deaf? In response, I send out $100 to help pay for medical expenses. I know it doesn't sound like much. But that's not what she's saying. So when I found out that I graduated from college, they were able to give that money back to me. And they had said that all they had was $100 because they were retired. So I think that was pretty funny, but it was nice of him to try. And then there was a second letter about baseball. So in 1904, there was a boy named Luther Taylor. And he was deaf. And he pitched for the New York Giants. And he actually got his education at Kansas School for the Deaf. After he had came back as an educator, his team and his manager actually learned sign language, so they were able to communicate with him. And that was a pretty awesome experience. He's responsible for being able to show the signals and catch. Until this day, they're able to use those signs and those gestures from back then of 1904. So they were able to mirror his signs, so they were able, but because he was so upset, they threw him out of the game. And then the final sentence, it said on there, to be able to watch for that man. Because his son was on the baseball team for a few years, so it was important to be able to watch his signs. That way, he was able to see him out in the outfield. So that letter was so heartwarming for me. And I cherish that letter till this day. And I share it with other family members and other friends because it's so special to me. And now to remember my father, Dave, Uncle Bob's brother, he had mentioned a game of heart. Oh, okay, it's not up there. But I wanted to see I wanted to show all the signatures there of the evidence. Because I was playing with it. It's not up there, but I want you to see all the signatures that I got because I did get them. But to be honest, it's not true though. There was no signatures. But I do have signatures on my phone. So of the game of hearts there when we had played in 1988. Gosh, I think I was about 25 years old. So I do have all the signatures of Uncle Bob and my dad and my mom and me, of all four of us. And I won. And I won that game. But I wasn't able to win because I kept trying and I kept trying until I finally won. And I was so excited. And I had to make sure that everybody was able to sign this so I'm able to keep that evidence. Because I don't typically win. So he wrote on there, Uncle Bob, in parentheses, and then he said, you cheated. And then he said, you cheated. He said, they cheated. But it says, but I have evidence right here. I do have evidence to show you, so. Of all the signatures right here. That was from 1988. And I kept it. I kept the note ever since. That's something that I would always keep forever. And I want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for allowing me to share. Yep, that's it.
Here's the letter. And the
Yep.
scorecard.
See, there's all the signatures.
They all signed it. 1988.
Yeah, there's all the signatures. You can see. After church, after service, I'll be able to show you guys. If you don't believe me, I have it right here. Because my dad said it's not true, but look, I have it right here. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to share. And thank you for the interpreters. Thank you, family and friends. Thank you. Uncle Bob was so special to me. Thank you. I love you guys.
If there is a purgatory, I think we know what Bob's working on up there. His competitive nature, perhaps. He's going to have to work that one out. We're going to invite Zach up to read Matthew 6:2-4, and then we're going to have a couple eulogies from the sons.
So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Matthew 6:2-4.
It's ironic that I'm wearing a Dodgers hat and he's wearing the Mariners. Oh, that was good. All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks, kid. How many winters does it take to fix a podium? I wrote most of this eulogy before my dad passed, so I thought he was the most important audience to hear it. So I'm going to read from it today. I remember Vin Scully announcing the game. His voice played from an orange AM transistor radio that sat on my dad's dresser. My dad often turned the game on and lay on the bed for a Sunday afternoon nap, and sometimes I'd come in and lay beside him. More than the game, I remember Vin Scully reading commercials for Farmer John sausages. Baseball was a big part of my dad's life, and now mine too. My dad coached all my Little League teams. We'd often have a catch in our backyard or go to the baseball diamond behind our house, and he'd catch me while I threw a bullpen, even though I was a horrible pitcher. In the 5th grade, I quit baseball for the swim team, and I'm sure it broke his heart, but my dad would never say that. He later sometimes recalled me as a good second base player, natural fielder with a short throw to first. He'd snicker a little at that dig, and I did too. Ironically, or actually faithfully, I met my wife Lindsay on the swim team. We were only 11 years old, and we didn't date until the end of college. We got married a couple years after we graduated, and now Lindsay and I have 4 boys. All of them played Little League baseball, and that's what would ultimately bring me back and understand better my dad's love of the game. As our boys' passion grew for baseball, it also grew with me again. We're all hooked now, and if the Mariners ever make the playoffs, it's the longest drought in professional sports, our family will be in the stands cheering, hopefully this October. My dad's favorite baseball player and hero was Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson, whose number 42 has been retired by every Major League Baseball team, is also symbolic of my dad's life. Jackie represented athleticism and sport, but more importantly, Jackie Robinson represented justice. First, sports. You all know that Bob enjoyed playing sports, especially golf and softball. When I was growing up, he organized and coached co-ed softball teams with his friends and coworkers. He played third base, and my mom played outfield. He later added Greg and a couple of his friends, some of them are here today, to the lineup. By the time I was old enough to play, he quit the league. I'm not sure how to feel about that. But his softball playing resumed when he and my mom moved here to Sun City, Roseville, where my dad played into his 80s, up until a couple years ago. Some of his teammates and golf buddies are here. Thank you very much for coming and for your friendship to my parents. Like his brothers, my dad was an intense competitor. Many of you know the Winter brothers from their latter years of trash-talking golfers, where my Uncle Dave, the smallest of the 6 brothers, always won. But earlier in their lives, they also compete over basketball and softball. I don't know who won those games, and don't bother asking any of them. They'll all claim they did. Each thinks he's the best athlete, too. But even earlier in that, my dad and his older brother, Dick, a pitcher, who threw hard enough to play pro ball but instead opted for the seminary, they both played together on the New Hampton Baseball Club with former pro players, including my Aunt Danita's father, A.V. Johnson. And Danita says that fans came from miles and from the surrounding towns to watch the Johnson brothers and the Winter brothers play. I know she was being generous that most people wanted to see A.V. and Dick play together. There's a picture of that team in the foyer. When I was growing up, in addition to baseball, my dad took me golfing and patiently carried on when I'd throw my clubs in anger. And we also shot hoops in the front yard. He taught me Kareem's skyhook. My skyhook is a little less effective than Kareem's. He and my mom coached my first soccer team despite knowing nothing about the game. And my mom pushed the family to get outdoors, so we all backpacked, camped, and skied. My dad often raised the ire of our mother when he spun Brodies in the icing parking lot of the ski hill. I'm forever thankful for the many adventures our family took together. But the other and more important part of my dad's hero, Jackie Robinson, was his mission for justice. This was the most significant quality my dad possessed and deeply impacted me, the importance of justice in our fellow man, our neighbors, our community, And unlike me, justice didn't mostly come from his words or his votes or his prayers. My dad lived it. I'm guessing some of you were surprised to learn that Bob was a Catholic priest. Growing up, priests were the model of servitude and took care of the neediest people in their community. They fed hungry families and gave shelter to the homeless, especially during cold Iowa winters. My dad, who wanted to help his fellow neighbor, thought that being a priest was the best way to do that. In hindsight, I think we can all agree, especially Greg and me, that becoming a priest was not the best decision he ever made. And I'm thankful that he left the priesthood and had a family. But still, Bob had a strong motivation to help less fortunate people. He enrolled in graduate school, social work program at Fresno State, where he met a younger classmate who he'd later marry, my mom. They both became social workers and eventually moved to Lompoc, California, where Greg and I were born. When I was in middle school, or when I was in the middle of kindergarten, we moved to Visalia, and growing up, when people asked what my dad did for a living, I said he was a social worker. In time, I learned that, more specifically, he worked in emergency response for Child Protection Services. Eventually, I understood what that really meant. He saved kids from the worst and most desperate living situations you don't want to imagine. Kids who are neglected by drug-addicted moms and dads and left to fend for themselves. Kids whose parents beat them repeatedly, and kids who were sexually abused by family members. All of the grossest and most despicable things that a child would ever have to endure. And our dad stepped in to save them. For more than 30 professional years, my dad helped and served others, especially helpless, defenseless kids. You'd probably think that this work and the incomprehensible scenes he witnessed daily would cause him a lot of stress, but I never saw it. His temper was always even. His love was unconditional. I mentioned my golf club throwing. I inherited the infamous winter temper. Hey, Uncle Tom? But there were a million other things I did growing up that my dad should have gotten angry at, like the time I stole eggs and egged houses while at a friend's sleepover, or the time I totaled our Honda when I rear-ended another car, or the time I got drunk and threw up in the house, or the time in college when I got kicked out of the dorms and my dad had to hire a lawyer. You can ask me why later. All of those times and 100 more I'm probably forgetting. I certainly knew I had done wrong and I learned valuable lessons, but my dad never really got angry with me. He showed me unconditional love and hired me a pretty good lawyer. I think given my dad's upbringing, the hard decisions he'd had to make, and the things he'd come to understand about life through the lens of seeing suffering firsthand, he knew what is truly important. He knew what was worth getting upset about and what was worth letting me work through myself. In hindsight, I understand this wisdom, and for my mom too. If only I had the same wisdom as a parent, right, kids? I'm grateful to my dad and the things he gave me. I didn't even mention his amazing sense of humor and sarcasm. Even as Alzheimer's set in, his wit never left him. He just had to listen to the same joke a few times. So I added a couple other anecdotes that I'll share here too. I had the great fortune of spending time with my parents the last couple of weeks, my dad's life while in hospice care at home. I'm very grateful for that. Eventually I had to return home to my family in Seattle, and Greg and I talked about continuing helping Mom through the month because it seemed like he'd go on for a while. I actually was flying home in time to see 2 of my kids' baseball games. When I hugged my dad and said goodbye, I told him I was going to watch Anders and Giles play that weekend. He smiled really big. He wasn't able to talk at that point. You could see the happiness on his face. On my flight home, I got to talking to the guy next to me, who, as it turns out, is an MLB scout for the Pittsburgh Pirates. That obviously led to some great baseball conversation. I'm sure you're all jealous. But in our conversation, I mentioned stories of my dad, how he was a lifelong fan of the Dodgers, and how they're my October team, and how much baseball was a part of our shared experience. Near the end of our flight, I received a text message. I had forgotten to turn my phone on airplane mode. It was from Greg, and it read, "Dad just passed." When we landed and were getting off the plane, my new MLB scout best friend again expressed his condolences and said that it was pretty cool that baseball was a big part of my dad's life. He had given me his business card earlier and again offered to come watch Giles pitch high school games next season. As I close, I'll take you back to Jackie Robinson and his number 42. It's the most important number in all of sports, and today, August 13th, is exactly 42 days since Bob passed on July 2nd. As well, most of you may remember famed Dodger manager Tommy Lasorda. Well, he died exactly 542 days before Bob did. Here's a special message that Tommy gave my dad for his 83rd birthday.
Bob, this is Tommy Lasorda here. But you'll never thought you would live long enough to see the Dodgers win another World Series. That's right. You and me both. Happy 83rd birthdays. You will fart. Take good care. God bless you. And go Dodgers.
I know I speak for my whole family when I say thank you for coming here, remembering my dad, and honoring my dad with us. If you knew Bob Winter at all, there were many things that were obvious. One was that he loved sports. There are many former softball teammates and golf buddies here. And the other thing that was obvious about my dad was that he loved his family. These two loves of sports and family kind of wound around each other our whole lives. And he taught us how to play different sports as kids. He coached our baseball teams. He sacrificed a lot for us growing up. Dad pretty much stopped playing golf when we were young. Instead, he used that time to help my mom raise Jeff and me. Only when we were old enough to start learning the game ourselves did he take up golf again. And when we were out of the house, then he got back to playing 3 times a week like he wanted to, with some of you here. Now, the only time these two loves of family and sports conflicted was when we had to plan a family vacation. Whether we were heading up to Sun River or visiting the Seattle winters, Dad would say something along the lines of, "I can only be there from Thursday to Tuesday because I have softball practice." So he had to plan his vacation around practice and games. And I know that there are some of you here who don't even think that's weird. His brothers are probably sitting there thinking, "Of course you plan your vacation around softball. What's wrong with that?" Now, besides sports and family, you may also know that my dad was a man of few words. And while this may have made him seem reserved or withdrawn, it actually made a great impression on me. To me, my dad epitomized the old saying that actions speak louder than words. Dad showed me that life is to be lived, not just spoken. There were 2 scriptures we chose this morning. The first was from Matthew 25, and that's the one where Jesus said, "Whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." The reason we chose this passage was that we thought it described my dad. I mentioned he was a man of few words. How many of you knew before today that he was a priest? I didn't know he was a priest when I was growing up, when I was younger either. Do you know why he didn't share that? It wasn't because he was embarrassed. It's because when people found out he was a priest, they started to treat him differently. And being treated differently based on some title was the antithesis of who my dad was. He didn't care about titles and credentials. In his eyes, everyone started on equal footing. I remember when he retired from his career as a social worker, they had a big party in my parents' backyard. At that party, I met the janitor from his office, and he spoke kindly of my dad. Now, inviting the janitor wasn't some act of charity, and it wasn't a badge of honor, and it wasn't any kind of outreach that he did. He invited the janitor because he knew him, and he befriended him. He socialized with everyone. To Dad, everyone deserves a seat at the table. It didn't matter who you were. When Dad was forming a golf team for a tournament, he had one of the greenskeepers on his team. Now, the greenskeeper was a scratch golfer, so this may have been a competitive move. But at any rate, he only knew that Jose was golf prowess because he got to know him and he befriended him. Everyone had a seat at the table with Dad. The second scripture we chose this morning came from Matthew 6, and this is the one that talked about when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. To me, this passage is about making your giving such a part of your life that you don't even think about it. Giving is so intrinsic to who you are. Then when you give with your left hand, your right hand has no idea what your left hand is doing. It's just natural. It's just who you are. Dad was originally drawn to the priesthood because he wanted to help people. He went down to Bolivia to serve people who had less than enough. After that, he became a social worker. I asked him why he worked so many years with Child Protective Services, and he said it's because those kids needed someone to help them. Even in his later days, Dad found out that one of the only churches in this area that was led by a black minister had its building desecrated with KKK graffiti. He called me and said we should help. He didn't need a reason. His left hand did not know what his right hand... Let me try that again. His left hand did not know what his right hand was doing. He just responded with kindness, love, and help. Now, the last thing my dad instilled in me was that there was almost no situation so serious that you couldn't bring levity to it. I don't want to get boogers all over the mic. I thought it was a booger, but it's not. Okay, so where was I? So almost no situation was so serious that you couldn't bring levity to it. I remember driving up to Sequoia National Park on a snowy day. Jeff mentioned the doing Brodies in the parking lot. The way I recall the story was it was an icy road, and my mom was afraid. And so Dad thought the best thing to do, since it was a scary situation, was pull over into a parking lot and start doing donuts in the parking lot. My mom was definitely saying, "Bob," as he drove down the icy road. My kids can now do an impression of Mom saying, "Bob." Jeff and I laughed, and the cries of "Bob" grew louder and louder. So in situations of fear, Dad would bring humor, but he'd also do it in times of celebration. All of you knew my dad. You probably were mocked by him. At Elise and my wedding, I got up and gave a speech, as grooms are wont to do. I declared, "This is one of the best days of my life." And Dad mocked me. "One of the best days? Wow, did it beat out junior high graduation?" Even up to the end, when he had trouble walking and needed help getting around with his walker, he would challenge my kids, "Do you want to race?" After his first stroke last September, he spent a few weeks in a rehab facility nearby in Roseville here. One time when I was visiting, he needed help getting to the bathroom. I helped him into the bathroom, and luckily, one of the nurses arrived in time to help, and Dad said, "Which one of you gets the pleasure of wiping my butt?" But he didn't say butt. All of this is to say thank you for being here. Many of us are feeling sorrow, and I definitely am too, but I, for one, am thankful. Dad made an impression on me. Dad showed me the importance of having fun. I want to invite the Pagels back up. We're going to sing Amazing Grace together. I just want to close by saying I learned many things from my dad that I aspire to live up to. The first is be competitive but compassionate. Next, it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Everyone gets a seat at the table. Life is more than words. Who you are is exemplified by the way you live your life. And almost nothing is so serious that you can't bring levity to it. Whether it's a time where you're scared or celebrating, or even when you're not at your most proud moment, he could make you laugh. So I'm thankful that you're here celebrating Dad's life with us. And I'm also thankful that I never had to wipe his ass. You'll all stand, we're going to sing this together.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that taught me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
You may be seated. I'm going to borrow Dave's idea here and just think if you're here, you probably have a memory of Bob. And so if we were to ask you to share I want you to seal in your mind what you've just shared today. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about that memory of Bob that you want to seal away. Thank you. I have a few final thoughts here, but first I just want to say to Carolyn, we love you. And we watch you care for your husband. It was beautiful. So. I'm known as the crying pastor, so this is not usual. But we do love you, and we want to support you in this transition time. I'm grateful your family can be here with you. You did a great job just caring for your husband in the hard last couple of years, so I commend you for that. A couple of thoughts, and then we'll close. Over the summer, I read a book called The Spiritual Exercises of St. Ignatius. It's a series of meditations over 4 weeks that you work through, and the first 3 meditations are foundational to the rest, and I was really captured by them. The first meditation, you're asked to think deeply about the truth that I come from God. That once I was nothing, and that God chose to create me out of pure love. And he created the exact me that I am, preferring me to the infinite other creatures he could have brought into being. And in calling us into being, Augustine wrote that this was God's heart for us. Amo volo ut sis, which means I love you, I will you to be, but probably better translated, I love you, I want you to be. When we name the truth that we name the truth here that God willed Bob Winter. God wanted Bob Winter. God loved Bob Winter by calling him into being. The second meditation, you're asked to meditate on the idea that I belong to God. He called me into being. He wanted me. I belong to him. The life I now have, the next breath I breathe, is sustained and willed by God. It's his choice. Thus, my life belongs to him. So it was God who gave Bob life, and it was God who created Bob to do the work he did. I don't think God was surprised by his early choices. I think God intended him to do the social work he did. He saw him rescuing those children. I think God knew and understood the man he was called to be and the family he was called to raise, as evidenced by this wonderful family sharing here today. The phrase, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," comes to mind when I think about Bob's life. So Bob belonged to God. He came from God. He belongs to God. The third meditation, these are the first 3, you're asked to contemplate the thought that I am destined for God. Ignatius wrote this, "A God infinitely wise must have proposed to himself an end in creating me, a purpose, a telos. A God infinitely perfect could have only created me for his glory, that is to say, to know him, to love him, and to serve him." So St. Ignatius saw that our final destiny is in God. And it's my conviction that Bob is present with God and has entered into his destiny. We mourn his loss, we miss him, but Bob is experiencing God in a way that we are not able to in this life. He's now entered into life at its fullness and love in its completeness. So we grieve our loss, but we celebrate the life that Bob had and the life that Bob has. That life is not ended. He is fulfilling God's destiny for him. And these thoughts comfort us as we think about our loss. So I'm going to ask us to stand now, and we're going to say together the Lord's Prayer, and then I'll give a final benediction. I think we have it up on the screen. Would you join me in saying this? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. From the Book of Common Prayer. Into your hands, O most merciful Savior, we commend your servant Bob. Acknowledge, we humbly ask you, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redeeming. Receive him into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and in the glorious company of the saints in light. We ask this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I'm going to have the family be dismissed first. They're going to be able to greet you in the foyer and outside, so you guys can go ahead. We ask that you continue to wear a mask, and you guys can share stories and look at pictures and make sure you sign the book before you leave. Grace and peace to you today.